Howdy, scallywags and scallywenches. I'm your host, Dawn, and I don't know why my light's flickering, but today I'm going to be talking to you all about May Day. May Day is exactly 6 months from Samhain, which is another night, Halloween, we call it, that witches are said to run amok. It's not so much that I was necessarily wrong last year, something I claimed in my video, but I could have elaborated more and been more specific. So I'm going to play a clip now and then kind of correct myself. According to Walpurga's hagiography, she left her convent in Dorset, England, and head out for Heathen, which means House of the Heathens, where she founded a new convent for German women who had just converted from heathenism. So it's just a little ironic that her feast day, May 1st, happens to be associated so much with witches, and she set out to convert. I wanted to correct what I said in last year's video because technically May 1st is not the feast day of Walpurga. Most of the saints' feast days that are adopted and officially recognized by the church are actually chosen for the die natalis. So consider the fact that her actual death date is February 25th. It's different. It's not common that here we have Walpurga being celebrated more so on May Day. The debauchery surrounding May's Eve has nothing to do with St. Walpurga's life. May 1st is not even her primary feast day. So why does May Day stand out as the most important date of when her bones were translated? Her bones were moved at different dates to several different churches. There's a reason that it's called Hexennacht, and that according to legends, witches are the most powerful on this night. Sir James Frazer, who wrote The Golden Bough, claimed that in Central Europe it was apparently on Walpurgisnacht, the eve of May Day, above all other times, that the baleful power of the witches were exerted to the fullest extent. And he goes on to mention that in Tyrol, as in other places, this included smudging for the last 3 days of April, burn rue and juniper to dispel the witches. Walpurga was a Benedictine nun that was born in Devonshire, England in 710. And a lot of the books I'm reading give a different date for her death. Some books will say 777, 779, 776. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to go with 777 CE, Common Era. So her father became a saint, her two brothers became saints, which I think were Winibald and Willibald. I'm sure their parents got those names mixed up, right? Walpurga was even the niece of Saint Boniface, often referred to as the Apostle of Germany. In 748, Saint Boniface was the first saint to call women to his aid. I just think it's interesting that he needed women's help in order to convert the heathens. So Abbess Teta got this letter, and she sent over many nuns, as well as Saint Lioba and Saint Walpurga. The location where Boniface is said to have chopped down Thor's sacred oak tree is now the site of St. Peter's Cathedral in Fritzlar. So there's literally a statue outside of this church of Boniface standing on top Thor's sacred oak, a sign of his triumph over our culture. This is not a very novel idea for the church. You have St. Bridget stepping on a druid's sword in her depictions. We have St. Patrick stepping on snakes, or Mary stepping on snakes. St. Boniface was later hacked to death by Germanic heathens with swords and axes on June 5th, 754. Walpurga is still going in Heathen trying to convert people over 20 years after Boniface's killed. There are a few hagiographies or written stories detailing her life and her miracles, but these did not show up until the earliest ones being by Wolfhard von Herden in 856 or 857, and the other one is the Vita Secunda of the 10th century. Around 100 years after Walpurga in 777, her tomb and her monastery was going to ruins. A lot of her miracles happened posthumously, and this is when she was canonized once they realized her bones were doing weird things. When you move a saint's holy relics, we call it to translate them, even though we don't have any proof that any of them are actually bones of the saint we claim. Walpurga is one of those saints who is oil yielding. Here in Texas, people make fun of how I say oil, because they say ol, I say oil, so I add too many syllables, but She's an oil-yielding saint, or an Elephori. Saint Nicholas of Myra, we've all heard of Saint Nick. He's another one. People go on pilgrimages to this day to visit her tomb and get some of this magical oil, which now they have scientifically tested, and it is just water. If you look up the name Walpurga on these baby name websites that give you the meaning of names, it'll tell you something like protectress of the fortress, because Berg in German can mean fortress or mountain. You will notice at the beginning of her name, Wal or Val is the same as Valhalla or Walhalla. So the name Walpurga could also mean the fortress of the slain or the mountain of the slain. Perhaps the legend of witches gathering on the Harz Mountains during this time has something to do with that being the mountain of the slain. In the 11th century, we see the earliest depiction of Walpurga, and she is actually shown holding some grains. It's interesting that she becomes the patroness of good harvest because people would pray to her during May to prevent famine. She has really nothing to do with a good harvest or preventing famine. I'm personally under the impression that there likely already was a goddess that had this role, such as the Lady Freya or another fertility kind of deity, and then Walpurga took that role over. So next is going to be a little presentation to explain this complex artifact.
Walpurgisnacht and May Day are widely attested to in literature, but there's also plenty of evidence for their celebration in the ancient astronomical record and sacred landscape of Germany. The Harz Mountains, and the Brocken in particular, have long been associated with Walpurgisnacht, but the discovery of the Niebuhr sky disk has provided a better understanding of why this association is so strong. The Niebuhr sky disk was discovered in the 1990s, and is the oldest known astronomically correct depiction of the night sky. While there is some debate as to the exact meaning of everything on the disk, it is well established that the two gold bands around its border mark the summer and winter solstices as they would be observed from the place it was found. A cluster of gold circles is accepted by scholars as a representation of the Pleiades, which rise in the sky in late April. Archaeologists have also unearthed two nearby ancient observatories, Middelburg and Goseck. There are hundreds of such ancient observatories scattered throughout Europe. The oldest observatory yet found is Warren Field in Scotland. Such observatories were used by our ancestors to keep the lunar year in line with the seasons of the solar year. They show that advanced astronomical concepts were understood and widely used thousands of years ago. Our ancestors used the lunar calendar for day-to-day purposes because it was simple and easily available to everyone. It takes no special equipment or deep understanding to look up at the sky and see the 8 phases of the moon. But the lunar year soon becomes out of sync with the 4 seasons of the solar year, and so our ancestors devised means of keeping the easily followed lunar calendar in step with the solar seasons. This tracking of the solar year established 8 solar tides to mark it, just as 8 phases mark the lunar cycle. The 2 equinoxes, 2 solstices, and 4 cross-quarter days divide the solar year at 8 different points. This 8-tide year, sometimes known as the octagon, was detailed in the ancient text De Agricultura by the Roman senator Cato. Middelburg and Goseck are important to us because they establish an ancient link between the Harz Mountains, Walpurgisnacht, and May Day. If you were standing at the observatory associated with the Niebuhr sky disk, you can see that the sun sets behind the Kuppenberg of the Harz Mountains on May Day. This solar alignment can also be seen from the nearby Goseck circle as well. The sun can also be observed setting behind the Brocken on the summer solstice from both observatories. These alignments provide a solid link between the observation of May Day, or the traditional New Year, and the peaks of the Harz Mountains. These mountains have long been associated with Walpurgisnacht and witches, which, no pun intended, should come as no surprise since our ancestors believed that the night begat the day. This region is also home to Merseburg, which is the place where the ancient spells known as the Merseburg charms were preserved. Also relevant to the archaeoastronomy of our ancestors are the gold witch hats that have recently been shown to be lunisolar calendars. These golden artifacts, such as the Berlin witch hat, can be used to keep track of the 19-year Metonic cycle, further proving the advanced understanding that our ancestors had of the universe. These artifacts, as the name suggests, are thought by some to be hats, but they were almost certainly not worn as hats. What is most likely is that they were used to adorn ancient god poles, and perhaps be used as sacred vessels during rituals. It is interesting to note that one of these objects could be shifted after every cycle, either by facing the cardinal directions or moving to another god pole, and easily track the Calippic or even the Hipparchic cycles. These cycles are important because understanding and tracking them allowed our ancestors to use the lunar cycles in the sky as accurately as we use the calendar apps on our phones today. This was incredibly important for people whose very survival depended on knowing the seasons to prepare for planting, as well as hunting and gathering seasonal fish and flora. It was with the knowledge provided by the observatories and expressed in artifacts such as the golden witch hats, one of which bears a likeness that is strikingly like the octagon, that our ancestors tracked the 8-tide solar year by the 8 phases of the moon. All of these solar tides were observed and celebrated by our ancestors, as described by the poet Ovid in his great work Fasti. He mentions the rise of the Pleiades, observation of the sky according to ancient annals, and the fact that the Romans, like all other people, originally reckoned the new year to begin on May 1st, until it was changed by Augustus to honor his father Julius Caesar. So when you do your research and look at the facts, it's easy to see why Walpurgisnacht is associated with witches and celebrated in the Harz Mountains. Our ancestors didn't expend the time and effort on building these observatories or squander the wealth poured into the golden witch hats to mark these significant solar tides, but not celebrate them. Of course they celebrated them. May Day was the New Year's Day of the ancient world, and that makes the celebration of Walpurgisnacht the ancient New Year's Eve party. Wild and strong women dancing in celebration honored the goddess who birthed in the new year. This was represented in our mythology as Noth giving birth to Dagger, and referred to explicitly by Tacitus in Germania. The church, naturally, painted these evil women as witches in league with the devil, and so the Harz and the Brocken have been rich with tales of witchcraft and bacchanalian revelries. The church was unable to stamp out such a significant date, which had been celebrated for thousands of years and transcended previous cultural shifts. So in accordance with long-standing church policy, outlined by leaders such as Pope Gregory, the church co-opted Walpurgisnacht, just as they did with Yule, Easter, and other lesser tides.
Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to click that notification bell and subscription button to stay tuned for more content. I'm wishing you all an enchanted May Day.
Heathen caution.